Welcome to the 2022-2023 school year. I'm Michelle Zimmerman, and on behalf of Renton Prep, I will guide you through the progression of our school's response plan. First, I want to acknowledge our team, our students, and our families. Each person who has been part of this story has helped bring the school's mission, vision, and action to life. Looking back over the time since the beginning of the pandemic, we can be proud of all we have accomplished together. Our journey started earlier than most schools, where we were monitoring the outbreak in 2019. We began early conversations with students, and a guest speaker was a microbiologist with a specialization in infectious diseases in February 2020. That became the foundation for a projected plan of 3 to 5 years of potential educational disruptions due to the pandemic. At the time, others were saying the U.S. would not likely be impacted at all. Later, some said only 2 weeks in a pause in learning would be impacted. By March 6th, we had a plan in place for staff and students. In the event of mandated closures, we wanted to make sure there were no surprises. We wanted to give time to prepare, for students to practice on-site as if they were remote, so when we went remote, they would know what to do. Moments that seemed inconsequential became historic. Because our curriculum is dynamic, we took those ordinary moments experienced by our students and turned them to art based on historical true stories of their own lived experiences. We have captured and documented our timeline, the innovations and evidence of success that was based in decades of internationally recognized research implemented into practice, preparing for future unknowns, and supporting continuous improvement with our school design and for staff and students. You can see this interactive timeline in the Wakelet collection. Engage with videos, social media posts, news stories, articles, and conference presentations, as well as student-created artifacts. We were the first school in Washington State to meet and exceed all of the guidelines for reopening in person in August 2020. We kept our promise and kept kids and staff safe from COVID-19. We have a proven track record of establishing foundations rooted in science, speaking with experts, and learning from history. Our plan took into consideration a range of complexities from pedagogy and assessment to family challenges to social and emotional health and well-being of our students and faculty. While providing as much normalcy as possible, we offered in-person experiences, field trips, holiday celebrations, school photography, and yearbooks. No plan is perfect, but we have documentation of this plan and how it resulted in a strong track record of zero COVID-19 transmission at school to date through the entirety of the pandemic. We closed our third end of the school year during the pandemic with new innovations and recognitions. Despite the challenges and what was called the impossible for teaching and learning during a pandemic, our school continued winning awards for our visionary leadership, Tech for Good, acknowledgments of educational excellence in our students by President Biden in a letter from the White House on March 15, 2021. In a time so many schools said it's impossible to make progress during a pandemic and it's never been done, we said it's not an option. People have been innovative in the past, and we can build off of what they learned and what they recorded in history to construct new knowledge and communicate it in a creative way to continue meeting our school's vision. Our school's vision hasn't changed. To inspire a passion for harnessing emerging technology for teaching, learning, critical thinking, and sharing the hope of becoming responsible and productive citizens whose legacy will leave this world a better place. Looking back to history helped provide forgotten guidelines and timelines comparing results across cities that looked and took different approaches. In developing our school's response plan, I also looked at historical medical documents, conditions that followed pandemics, and realized the potential of parallels might exist, just as we're seeing now with neurological conditions from this pandemic. In the Wakelet collection in our school website, you will find resources, links to articles, videos, research, and comments from medical doctors, research epidemiologists to help your family access some of the latest emerging science as you make decisions. You can watch the video on its own and in its entirety, as I'm only playing a segment here.
Now a lot more kids are becoming infected with COVID. And so one of the next things we'd like to explore in the laboratory is to understand how early life exposure to even mild respiratory COVID might influence both brain development, brain plasticity, and cognition. As a parent, as somebody who takes care of children in the clinic, after COVID exposure, I'm very attentive to how school is going, to whether they're complaining about, not being able to remember things, if they're having difficulty finding their words to describe, certain things in conversations, their overall level of fatigue. I think there's many things to pay attention to as a parent, as a teacher, as a physician. It's not clear what neurological diseases people may be at increased risk for down the road. And so it's of some real urgency to understand that, to understand these neurobiological underpinnings of this initial response to COVID, to know what people may be more susceptible to, and to reset these cells to a more normal state. The risk of long-term neurological disease really gives me pause and makes me not at all ready to decrease mitigation efforts.
All people, regardless of underlying conditions, are at risk of long COVID, and emerging data suggests increased risk for long-term health conditions with increased number of infections, including those with mild cases, those who are vaccinated and boosted, and children. Established medical institutions like Yale and Personal Counts have described the impact of long COVID on previously healthy kids. Because our school is rooted in science, we present you with information for you to make an informed decision when masking is optional, so you have the ability to consider the risk, not just for yourself, but also for those around you. Repeated exposures to COVID-19 are starting to show increased risk for multiple different types of conditions. This is an example of a study that looked at over 250,000 children from ages 1 to 10 who had COVID compared with other respiratory infections. Those who had COVID showed risk of elevated liver enzymes post-COVID persisting for at least 6 months. Symptoms like this can't be easily seen, like ongoing cough or fatigue. Going into the 4th school year hearing no so often, while many lives felt shattered, we know so many people are experiencing COVID-19 fatigue. We still care about health, safety, and the ability to maintain a safe learning environment with the least possible disruptions to educational procedure. Opinions continue to be polarized, as from the beginning in 2019, there are strong opinions and no consensus, even across the CDC and the treatment plan for President Biden as of August 2022. This epidemiologist, pathologist, and virologist pointed out the difference between the 5-day guidelines and the amount of time that positive test is still occurring. While some families may not feel concern any longer for the health risks, other families do have medically vulnerable members, placing them at risk for severe sickness. We care about equitable access for in-person learning for those who wanted it most and needed it when remote options didn't work for caregivers at the beginning of the pandemic, and we equally care about the options available for students with medically vulnerable family members. Our school continues to follow the latest research, including Yale University research, and the protocol used with President Biden requiring 2 negative COVID tests to exit isolation and quarantine. You can find more detailed information in our school Wakelet collection. Some of our guidelines are required by the Washington State Department of Health. By popular request, masking will remain optional until community transmission levels are identified as high, where CDC recommendations include universal masking for schools. There are a few other scenarios where universal masking or individual masking will be required based on guidelines, including symptomatic response found at school. Those details can be found in our school wakelet. Last year, all Renton Prep students were eligible for the Test to Stay program because we required universal masking. The program is eligible for those who choose to continuously mask with well-fitting masks such as KN95, and for those who are exposed at school. You'll see this guideline in our school wakelet as a graphic. You can tap or click the image to expand it to see more details. You'll see two different scenarios: if symptoms occur at school and if exposure occurs at school. In each scenario, there's an option if your family has chosen not to mask versus choosing to continuously mask. The options available to those who choose not to mask are on the left column. The options available to those who choose to continually mask are on the right column. You'll notice that those who choose continual masking are eligible for the Test to Stay program according to guidelines, and those who choose not to mask are not eligible according to the guidelines for Test to Stay. There's a different set of guidelines if symptoms occur outside of school or if exposure occurs outside of school. Again, the options for those who do not choose to mask continuously at school are on the left. The options for those who continuously to mask at school are on the right. You can find this graphic in the wakelet collection and expand it by tapping or clicking on the graphic. In the wakelet collection, you will also see a tree diagram that's provided to our school by the Department of Health to help us make decisions based on what occurs, exposures, symptoms, or outbreaks. From the beginning of the pandemic through the end of our closing school year 2022, we had zero COVID transmission at school. With masking as optional, outbreaks are more likely to occur. It's important that you familiarize yourself with our procedures and protocol if an outbreak does occur. Depending on what type of outbreak occurs at school, whether it's an individual classroom, across classrooms, or whole school, there are several different scenarios that are already laid out with definitions and what you can expect. Once you have time to make an informed decision about your family's choice to mask continuously or to remain unmasked when masking is optional, we'll ask you to complete a form with your decision so our school knows what process to take in the event of an exposure, symptoms, or a positive COVID test. We can't wait to see you back to make great new memories and see how much children we love will continue to grow this year. Thank you for everything you've added and contributed to our school, for the love that you have for your children, and for the trust that you have placed in us. We look forward to seeing you soon.